Yeah, because it's not like you're going to pass the bar exam and then all of a sudden start cold calling folks like, hey, I'm a lawyer now. I want to represent you.
Right,
you know,
right.
be
Call
my
your
first
friends.
client. Right. You know, they're going to be like, who's this guy? You know,
right. Yo, what to do? It's your boy, the SRT God. I'm back on your screen with another one, guys. Today, I have an entrepreneur, a legend in the Twin Cities, St. Paul area. I'm blessed to be able to have this individual in the building for multiple reasons, and you guys are going to find that out. But he is a guy of multiple hats. He is a co-chair of Sports Entertainment Group, graduated from the U of M, also master's from
Chapman,
and law degree in Mitchell
College of Law.
College of Law. Also, sports attorney for athletes in the NIL. Also, under 40 in 2021 from the Minneapolis St. Paul Business Journal. Chris, I appreciate you swinging through, brother.
Absolutely.
How the hell has life been, man?
Man, like you said, it is busy. You know, wear a lot of hats, you're gonna stay busy for sure.
Jeez, yeah,
for sure.
That bio is just probably not even a quarter of what you do. And honestly, that's kind of why I really wanted to kick things off and have you on here, because you are a guy of multiple hats. A lot of people in this city and state know who you are, and what you represent and where you're from. And being in the field that you're in as your main job,
yeah.
As an attorney of sports and representing these athletes on multiple different levels, is got to be just a handful, especially right now with all the college stuff going on and all the changes that are possibly coming into the field. And what we talk about today might be different in 3 weeks. You know, you just never know. So the things with college, you got to keep up on your toes with the position that you're in. And how is that all working out, and how does that all go down for you, watching all of this stuff really evolve right before your eyes?
Yeah, no, for sure. You know, so I'm going to take a step back a little bit. When I was in law school, I had no idea what I wanted to do, right? I didn't know what, my career path would be. I didn't know any lawyers, growing up in my family or otherwise, friends or any of that stuff. And all I knew about lawyers was what I saw on TV, right? And that's certainly not an accurate depiction of what lawyers do on a day-to-day basis. So even while already in law school and committed to becoming a lawyer, I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. But there was something that I knew that I enjoyed, and that was sports and music, right? So growing up, I played, all the sports that I could play, loved music, and it was just a personal interest and passion of mine. And so while in law school, I started meeting industry professionals, both lawyers and non-lawyers, agents and folks that work in the industry. And the common thing that I heard from everyone was that it is a difficult industry to get into unless you have, the appropriate contacts and a robust network. And I didn't have any of that, as a law student.
Right.
And so, one of the individuals I met at the time was like, yeah, because it's not like you're going to pass the bar exam and then all of a sudden start cold calling folks like, hey, I'm a lawyer now. I want to represent you. Be
Call
my
your
first
friends.
client. Right. They're going to be like, who's this guy?
Right.
I abandoned the idea of, going into sports and entertainment, as a practice area. And so while in law school, I had an opportunity to work at a big firm downtown after my first year of law school. At the end of that 12-week program, I was offered a permanent job, essentially saying, once you graduate law school, we have a job here for you. It's just contingent upon you coming back for a second summer. And so I was good to go. I had a job locked in, contract signed. And it was, at that time, I thought I was going to be a mergers and acquisitions attorney. I thought I was going to do deal work. I was going to be a transactional lawyer. But by the time I graduated in 2009, the economy had just tanked. The real estate market burst in 2008. And the firm was like, hey, there's no deal work going on. You should, we encourage you to pick from one of these two other practice groups because they're busy right now. You can develop your skills as a lawyer. So I ended up picking real estate and construction litigation. And so that's where I started my career, doing real estate and construction litigation. And, after a few years of doing that, the firm, circled back and said, hey, you had always want to do transactional work. Do you still want to do that? Or what do you want to do? And I was like, I'm actually enjoying the litigation I'm doing. I feel like I'm really good at it. It suits, me, my personality speaks to my strengths. And so I stuck with litigation and, now I've been practicing for 15 years. And it actually wasn't until 2015 So at that point, I'd been a lawyer for about 5 years. And I was presented with an opportunity to open up a new nightclub in downtown Minneapolis called The Exchange and Alibi Lounge.
Yeah.
And so it was actually through that venture that I started to develop that elusive, network that I didn't have, and started meeting people that would allow me to make a run at, developing opportunities in the sports and entertainment practice group. So that's how that came about.
So when you started doing the real estate and the litigation, when you talk about litigation, are you talking about like business litigations or just residential type stuff, or
Yep.
what kind of litigation was that?
So when I first started my career, I was doing mortgage foreclosures, right? And so
because it was huge at that time.
It was huge, right? Because
Yeah.
the real estate, market just exploded, and so the firm that I was working at the time represented a lot of big banks, and so with the collapse, they're like, we need to go out there and file these foreclosures and get our recoup our assets and all that other stuff.
Right.
So I did that, for 2-3 years, and then as the market started to turn around, I evolved a little bit. I shifted from doing real estate and construction litigation to just general litigation. Then I started working with a partner who really took me under his wings. He was kind of like my mentor, my sponsor, my champion. And he was doing securities litigation and financial services work. And so he was like, if we're going to be working together, like, you should join my group. So I started doing that. I had no idea what to expect there. Didn't take any of those classes in law school, but I was just evolving, with the opportunities that were presented to me, the connections that I was making with the right folks. And so I did that. And, 15 years later, I still do litigation. My practice has just evolved a little bit more towards the sports and entertainment in more recent years.
Nice. So when you open up a nightclub, you're in downtown Minneapolis, you're going to get presented to athletes. You're going to get presented to various of different kinds of people. Is that where you feel like your name started getting out there, was because you were a part of it, or because your face was in the business, or they knew of you from the business? How do you feel like these individuals started finding out who you truly were?
Yep.
Like what opened up a nightclub? I'm assuming you weren't a part of that as an attorney, right?
Right.
So that's gonna be a separate thing.
Yeah.
So when you open that up, obviously people are going to start finding out who you are because of the type of business that you're in, right?
Yeah, right.
So when they start finding out who you are, is that where you're kind of starting to navigate at that point of, okay, I can get clientele from this? Yeah. Or are people coming up to you saying, hey, I heard you were an attorney. Is that true? What do you do? What benefited you opening up that to kick off your attorney background even more?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, kind of the underlying basis for how I even got involved in the nightlife was a buddy of mine who was a financial advisor at the time. He was like, hey, I'm going to approach, a good friend of mine and their family, to see if I could do, some financial work for them. They just so happen to, own several properties, businesses, including, nightclub ventures. And so maybe you can come along with me for the lunch. I'm going to pitch kind of like what I do in the financial services arena. You can talk about what you do as a lawyer, right? And so at this point, I've been a lawyer for 5 years. I still don't know a bunch of it's still very new. And so at that lunch, got to meet this guy and his family. Great lunch, good opportunity. But I was just pitching essentially like, I'm a litigator, so I resolve disputes, right? And they didn't have a need for that specific area at the time. And so, while it was a great introduction, good meeting, nothing came of it in terms of me providing legal services for that family. But, shortly after that, the guy that I met, circled back and was like, hey, like, it was really good to meet you, and, I asked our mutual friend a little bit more about you. And, he says you're like a social butterfly. You grew up in the community. You're well known. So I might have a different opportunity for you. And I was like, okay, so what is the opportunity? And he was like, we're opening up a new nightclub in downtown Minneapolis, and we're looking for, an investor group who might want to participate and work with us.
Right.
So I was like, oh, this is, obviously a unique opportunity. And so I talked to my buddy who's the finance person. I was like, what do you think? Should we do this? And he was like, I'm down to do it if you are. So we were like, all right, cool, let's do it.
Right.
Right. And so that's how we got into it. And so, when you think about it, it was networking that got me that opportunity.
Right.
Right. It was my buddy willing to say, hey, I got this meeting. You should pull up with me. Let's sit down and talk to these folks who are obviously extremely successful individuals, entrepreneurs in their own right.
Yep.
And so we were like, all right, let's do that. And, part of me thought of like, all right, beyond just the financial investment and opportunity that provided, it was also, I've only been a lawyer for 5 years, and the majority of that ownership group were individuals that were not already in my circle, right? I was the only lawyer in that circle. I was probably the youngest. And, there were guys who lived all over the country, very successful, entrepreneurial. And now I've, presented an opportunity for myself where I get to rub elbows with them.
Yep.
Folks that are not in my circle.
Right.
And so that's really how that started. And, even once the club opened up, again, I've only been practicing law for a few years now. I wasn't sure how I was gonna, how active I was gonna be, because a lot of the investors in the co-ownership group, like they didn't do anything. They just, wrote a check and was like, all right, well, hopefully the club does well, right? I'll get some kind of return, And so for me, it was like,
and you're going, I got to bust my ass. I want the money back.
Man, I'm like, how active do I want to be with this,
Right.
And so it actually, was kind of like an alignment, of stars for me where, now we had this venue, a beautiful venue at that. And, I recall some of the things that I was dealing with as a young lawyer was, like this networking piece, right? The firm would encourage me to go to like galas and bar affinity events. And I always felt like, man, I got to throw on a suit, go to these, events, which I understand the purpose behind them. But, it was, I struggled with it. It wasn't comfortable for me.
Right.
Right. Because, based on my upbringing, and everywhere I grew up in, it was hard to even have like the water cooler conversation.
Yeah.
Right. Like, what am I going to talk to with these individuals about? And so I knew at that point that networking is something I needed to improve, something that I need to become better at.
Yeah.
Right. And as they say, with practice, that's how you improve.
So do you feel like when you did that you were so far out of your comfort that did you almost like at the point of giving up because it was so uncomfortable?
No, it wasn't to the point of giving up. For me, it was like, all right, here's another opportunity for me to level up and kind of, overcome adversity.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't the first time I've had to face that, right? Like I even like my first year in law school, I remember the first class I walked into was like a big auditorium class. There's a ton of students in there, and I'm in sweatpants, Timbs, a fitted, and I'm like, everybody's staring at me. And I tell you, I was probably one of two diverse law students in a room with like, nearly 100 students.
Wow.
So I already felt like I didn't belong. I stuck out like a sore thumb.
Right.
And I was like, how am I going to even navigate the next 3 years of getting through law school?
Right. Because you're just being yourself when you walked in the door.
Yeah. And it's super competitive, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't know, barely anybody there. I met a couple of people, And so I was like, all right, I got to weather the storm. I got to figure out how to, do well, position myself so that I can get a good job and graduate and pass the bar and all that stuff. So like, rising to the challenge was never an issue for me, right? So it was never a thought of giving up. It was like, all right, how am I going to navigate this? It was about trying to figure out how to do it. And so, one of the things that, I ultimately started doing was, all right, I need to be better at networking. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to start my own networking event, right? So in January 2017, I started a weekly Friday networking event at the Exchange in the Alibi Lounge, which is the lounge within the club setting. And it was geared towards bringing diverse professionals together in the Twin Cities. Essentially, I want to bring, people together who are entrepreneurs, professionals. And so I can get used to approaching them, talking to them, figuring out what they do, and just networking. And literally that started in January. And by June or July, the capacity in that space is maybe 120. By June or July, it outgrown that space. And so now we're doing weekly Friday networking events from like, 5 to 10 p.m. And there were, I think at our peak, probably at like 300 or 400 people, in the Twin Cities. And like, I'm getting to meet all these individuals.
How did you promote it back then?
I promoted it. So the brand was called Elevate Your Network. And then eventually evolved to Elevate Our Network because I wanted to sound inclusive. Like this is about us elevating our networks together.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's how I launched it. And it was really what I did the first week was I invited two professionals or entrepreneurs who are part of my circle and said, hey, I want to spotlight or feature you as a featured professional entrepreneur. I want to put up a bio, your picture, and say that you're going to be at, elevate our network. So come out and meet this individual if you want to learn about what they do.
Right.
And so then, that quickly evolved. The second week it was like 2 people. And then by the third week, there's like people reaching out to me like, hey, how do I become featured? Like I want to be featured and highlighted. And so then it kind of evolved into, all right, let's do it around industry groups, right? So we do like a health and wellness and fitness where we'd have like personal trainers, hairstylists and people in that industry. We did like a real estate segment where we would have people who are doing, mortgage loans, real estate professionals, closers, lender, like all, everybody in that industry.
Yeah.
And so we started doing the industry by industry, and then it outgrew that, right?
Wow.
So I said like by June, July, I think we started doing like, we're just going to highlight like all the dope females like in the Twin Cities that are doing something great.
Yep.
So we do like, Minnesota Girls Rock and do a Minnesota version of that. We would highlight the fellas, and so I think at our peak, we highlighted like 20 individuals that June or July.
Wow.
And we had like gift bags for them. And like what I realized is that oftentimes people are not celebrated unless they achieve something.
Right.
Right.
Fair enough,
They win an award, they get some accolades, and it's like, okay, now they're celebrating them. But what we are doing is we're just celebrating you for you.
Right.
Right. Like, all right, like and in some of these bios, people were very vulnerable. They talked about the struggles they had, the things they've had to overcome. And it's like, all right, well, now we want to put you on a pedestal because, here you are doing the best that you can.
Right.
Come out and let's meet folks. Yep. Right. And so I think that is what really propelled me to being well known, because as I mentioned, when I'm in these rooms and there's somebody I don't recognize, I walk over to them. Like, hey, who are you? Like, how did you hear about the event? What do you do? We're chopping it up, right? And I'll learn, oh, you just moved it from DC. Cool. Like, my buddy over here moved it from DC like a year ago. I should connect y'all.
Yeah.
Right. And so I kind of became, that bridge builder, right? I would bring people together and I'd find out and identify what their needs and wants are. And that was ultimately what my approach to networking was. Right?
That's a huge piece of networking.
Yeah.
That's actually a pro tip right there, guys. If you are one of those types of people that are like that and you're bridging things and you're walking up to people that you don't know and you're introducing yourself first, to me, I'm looking up to you because you came to me. And that shows me that you have not only the respect for me, but you want to introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are. Initiative. Yeah. I mean, that's what it is. And I think that's fucking awesome.
Yeah. It's like how can I help you?
That's so lost, I feel like, because you look around in rooms and like you said, you're in rooms with people and I've been there and I'm in there too with what I'm doing. But I look across the table and I'm like, I wonder who that guy is. I guess I don't necessarily take the initiative to do that. So that's something that I'm definitely going to learn right there from you is you don't need to go up there being cocky.
Yeah.
You just go up there, introduce yourself and be open. Yeah. And people are I feel people will gravitate towards that. That's actually, I love that, dude.
Absolutely.
I really do.
And I think there's often this misconception of what networking is. And people feel like, oh, I got to go somewhere to find my next client.
Right.
But I wasn't there to look for clients for the law firm or otherwise. I was just genuinely wanting to get to know people and figuring out how I can help them. Right. And so, I'll use, my buddy from DC as an example. And it was like, hey, you just moved here. Like, what do you need?
Right.
Like, now that you're in a brand new place, and he was like, first I need a barber. Right. Cause he was like, I gotta have a barber.
Love it.
My lady needs somebody to do her hair. So I was like, oh, what side of town are you on? Like depending on where you're in the metro, like I know a ton of barbers, ones that have actually put clippers to my head. And so I've vetted them, right? I'm not going to send you off to somebody who I've never, worked with before, right? Because my name is associated with that.
Correct.
Right. And so if I connect somebody, as an example, with the barber, right? Now there are 2 people who I've done a solid for.
Yep.
The barber who has a new customer, potentially like a loyal, lifelong customer.
Right.
Right. And then my buddy that I looked out for. Right. And so now anytime there's an opportunity where somebody, let's say, might need a lawyer, who's going to be top of mind?
Right.
Well, Chris, because Chris connected me with the barber.
And it's like, you don't do that to look for that. You're doing that out of the kindness of your heart, in my opinion. But what they do say is what goes around comes around, right?
100%.
So just because you did a solid for this guy, you're not expecting that. And I don't want you guys out there to expect just because you did a solid for somebody that they're going to do something in return. Do something, never expecting something back.
100%.
But you're doing it because you wanted to, because you were in that networking and you're trying to help people and you have a kind heart. But just don't do it to expect things to come back. And you don't do that. That's not what you're doing.
Right. No, that's why I think, when you are a good, solid person the universe conspires in your favor.
I agree.
I never do anything with the expectation of anything in return.
Right.
Right. I just want to help people. That's why I mentioned, like, I approach networking as how can I help you?
Right.
Right. And let me help you.
Yep.
And however I can do that, like, I'm being a good person, and I've been extremely fortunate and blessed in life, and I think that's because I've been a good person,
right?
Not because I've had any kind of expectation,
right? Yeah. So. I think I don't know. I'm just learning a lot here. I'm kind of mind blown at the moment because what you're saying is a lot of gems. It really is. If you guys are listening, I mean, it's great. So when you networked, I mean, you're going into this networking, not even knowing where it's going to go, where it takes off.
Right.
You're coming through. You're exceeding the limits of the building hold. You're at 300 to 400 people. Mm-hmm. Your name is definitely getting out there at this point.
For sure.
And you're rubbing elbows with some big name people, and like you said, you're just this little guy coming in, wanting to fit in, to learn what these guys are doing, and you never know when you open up that door to that office where it's going to lead you, and I think going back to what you said about introducing yourself and being that person that introduces yourself sets a tone, not only for you, but for your brand, for what you're doing. It just sets a tone for you. And I think that people are always going to remember that, hey, Chris, he came right up to me, introduced me, told me who he was and what he does, and wanted to know what I needed help with. I mean, that shit goes a long ways, because that one person is going to tell two turns into 10, it just goes right down the line. Absolutely. So you're at the point now where you're opening up this nightclub, you're involved. Where did you think that was going to go when you open this up? You're involved with different investors. Where did you think that was going to take you from where you were in your law career?
Yep.
Where did you think that was going to take you from there?
Yeah, I think, I understood the importance of networking, building relationships, and deepening those relationships. But I didn't have kind of like, an end goal where I was like, this is where I'm trying to go. It was really, I'm going to meet a bunch of people. I'm going to help as many people as I can. As cliche as it sounds, lawyers get into, the legal industry because they want to help, right? They want to be a change agent. They want to facilitate change, all the things that I've wanted to do. And I knew that I'd have those opportunities through, networking and meeting a bunch of people, but I didn't know exactly where it was going to go. And it wasn't until, literally years after development that it kind of started to become clear for me. And as an example, as I mentioned, the club opened in 2015. I didn't consider the sports and entertainment practice area of law until 2018, 2019. And so all this time between 15 and 18, 19, I'm planting a bunch of seeds.
Correct.
And I didn't know where those would turn up, or, how they would blossom and work out in my favor. It was just, I'm doing this, I'm meeting a bunch of people. And so, my very first professional athlete client that I worked with was through somebody I met at the Exchange on a random Saturday night.
Yeah.
Right. And so, a guy walks up to me. I had met him before, super cool dude. And he was like, hey, I just asked the bartender, about whose night this is, because I got a buddy in town with me from LA. He has Minnesota ties and he wants to DJ. Like, can we get him a set or let him rock it out for a little bit? I was like, oh yeah, for sure. Like, absolutely. Kick
the DJ off right then and there.
Like, it was like, hey, we got a guest in the house,
Yeah.
It's, hospitality. That's the industry, right? So we're being hospitable. And so made that, work out. And so, at the end of the night, the guy was like, yo, like, that was super dope. Like, we really appreciate your hospitality. You didn't know me from anybody. And like, we're just vibing. Like, cause that's what you do. You meet people, right? Yeah. And you get to know them. And he was like, let's exchange info or whatever. Let's chop it up outside of, obviously it's a loud environment.
Yeah.
And so,
not the place for that, right?
Right. So, we exchange info, and like, a week or two later, we have breakfast downtown, and I find out that, he's working at an ad agency at the time. And so, he was like, oh, like, I just launched a sports entertainment division at my ad agency. And I was like, bro, like, I'm interested in doing sports entertainment, trying to meet more people in the industry. And he was like, I was like, so who are you working with? He was like, I got one client. He was like, it's my childhood friend. It's Tyus Jones.
Yeah.
And I was like, legend. Oh, I was like, obviously everybody knows who Tyus is if you follow basketball in Minnesota. So I was like, man, that's somebody that's always been on my radar, just a good, beyond his basketball talents, he's just a down to earth, like just solid human being.
The family is
the
very,
family
very
dude, like,
solid.
oh my God, just an amazing family that it comes from. And so for me, it was like, if I were, if I had it my way and I could decide, the kind of athletes I want to work with, like he would be the guy.
Yeah.
Right. And so, we had breakfast, had good conversation. He was like, oh, you should, meet his business manager. And, that's how networking works. You meet one person that was like, oh, like if I can help you connect with somebody else. And this guy, I mean, he's a phenomenal connector. Like I learned a ton from him just from that, respect as it is.
Right.
Is how to, develop relationships and connect people and again, continue to be a bridge builder. So I eventually met the business manager and, started developing that relationship. And ultimately what started as a connection at the exchange became my first professional athlete client.
Wow.
Right. And so we didn't know what was going on at the time. Like I didn't have the foresight to know by letting you, let your DJ, get on the decks. That one day we would have breakfast and then followed up by that. And
the guy could have been living in a van.
Like you just don't know,
I mean, you just don't know who these
and that's
people
why you
are.
get to know folks. Right. And so seeing that kind of come full circle, it was like an aha moment. I was like, man, like you really don't know who people are or how they can get you into certain rooms or connect you with opportunities. And so just continue to be a good person and just continue to meet people.
Well, that's just it. That's why, like when I, with me going to the Wolves all the time and stuff, and I'm in different restaurants and areas and so forth, I never know who's sitting next to me.
Yeah.
But I find out.
Yeah.
One way or the other, whether they break the ice, I break the ice. Mostly it's them just because I try to keep to myself. I try to keep a little bit quiet when it comes to that stuff because people are already staring at me trying to figure out who I am.
Sure.
Just because I'm loud, right? I'm loud. I wear loud jewelry. I wear my clothes.
Yeah.
So they're trying to figure out who I am already. So they're going to come to me. It's just a matter of when. But you never know who they are. And that's actually come first full circle on me because I've sat down next to some pretty high-end attorneys in town and I would have never even thought, I thought they were from a rock band or something. You know what I mean? Yep. But you just can't ever judge somebody by what they look like. And I've learned that too, because you don't know where they're coming from or who they are or what they have in their background or who they can network you with. That stuff right there is just
that definitely
crazy.
Speaks to me, bro. Just because, I mean, how I'm dressed here today on a Sunday for your podcast is how I go to the
office. I totally thought you were coming in a suit.
No, like, and that's the thing, I remember there was a comment that was made to me probably like 6-7 years ago, in the Skyways, ran into somebody there was like, are you at work? And I was like, yeah. They were like, well, you're not dressed like a lawyer. And I was like, well, you tell me, how's a lawyer supposed to dress?
Fair enough.
You know what I mean?
Because
like
there's a stigma,
what y'all
right?
see on TV is everybody's in a suit all the time. And don't get me wrong, when I started my career, I was that guy in a suit every day.
Right.
And a part of it was like, all right, I know that I'm a good lawyer and I don't have to wear a suit to be a good lawyer.
Right. That suit's not going to make you or break you, right?
And so it was like, there was a lot of things that we talk about challenges and having to overcome adversity. When I was a young lawyer, bro, like I remember my first week on the job, went into my office and a guy, set some files down. I was like, all right, start this foreclosure. Let me know when it's done. I'm like, I got no guidance, no instruction, no man,
looks good.
Okay, like I'm on Google. Like, what does this mean? Like, and having to navigate a lot of those things, it was like I didn't have a ton of confidence. Even though I'd spent 2 summers there doing actual work of a first-year associate, I had to learn. I had to grind. And, I would say I probably didn't become confident and felt like I could be my genuine, authentic self as a lawyer until probably like year 3, 4, or 5.
Yeah.
Right. I was doing this for several years. And I was like, it wasn't until I started winning the arguments in court, until I started getting feedback from clients like, yo, that brief was really good. You did a good job. Getting feedback from senior partners who were like, yo, like you're killing it. Once I started to get that feedback, I was like, all right, I'm not the token diverse lawyer here.
Right.
Like I was able to ignore some of that imposter syndrome about whether I'm good enough to be in this space. Right. And once I earned my stripes, I was like, all right, like I'm in a groove.
Yeah.
I know that I'm good at this. And then slowly it was like the more I felt comfortable and confident being my genuine, authentic self meant I no longer have to wear a suit every day because unless I'm going to court or meeting a client, let me be comfortable, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, this should not dictate, whether I'm a good lawyer or not.
Right.
Just because I want to wear a hoodie and jeans or, whatever have you.
You want to be a normal person, right?
Right. And so like, to your point, it's like, you never know who's right next to you, when you meet people. I felt that, because it's like, I get that sometimes people feel more powerful when they got on a power suit. That's why they call it a power suit, right?
Yeah.
And I get all that. But then it's also about, the industry you're in. right? So like when I'm meeting with professional athlete clients, they're coming to my firm to sign something. They're in hoop shorts and a t-shirt.
Right.
I
Sandals.
for sure know they don't want to see me in a full suit.
No.
Their business
They might
managers would be
laugh
like, "You're not going to have on a suit, are you?" I was like, "I generally don't wear suits unless they're like, no, like please be comfortable,
Right.
Because that's how we're going to be coming." And so of course, so like when I meet with folks in the industry that I'm in, they're always comfortable,
Right.
And that
there's a time and place for the suit, right?
Oh,
I mean,
100%.
and you know that, and you know where that
Absolutely.
needs to be. And
absolutely.
when, like you said, I was going to say, does it take a strong-minded person to be an attorney, a lawyer?
Yes.
I mean, because what
yeah.
you're saying to me, like, I feel like a lot of people would be like, yeah, fuck that.
Yeah.
Right? That's too much
I mean,
shit.
it's definitely a grind. And that's the thing. Like, I feel like, first of all, you have to have a bachelor's degree before you go to law school, right?
Right.
So you have to have a 4-year degree. Then law school is 3 years. And law school is extremely competitive.
Yeah.
So the first year of law school, there's a mandatory curve that's designed to like weed out people who aren't going to hack it. So you're paying all this tuition for your first year of law school, and you might not even be there after that first year.
Right.
Right? Because there's this mandatory curve in place to like, all right, you really got to grind and bust your ass off.
Right.
And then you got to take the bar.
Yep.
At the end of this, and the bar is a 2-day exam.
Yeah,
It's like a test of endurance as well as knowledge. Like day one, you're taking, like 100 multiple choice questions in the morning. I think 100 in the afternoon. Then the next day is all written essays. Like
you got to get 60% right on all that.
And I don't even know what it was. And once I saw that I passed, I didn't care about the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it said P, I'm good.
I was like, look, I passed the bar. And, so it's like that right there. And, so right after high school, I grew up here in the Twin Cities. I went to De La Salle High School. I did my 4 years. I graduated from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. I moved to California, went to Chapman for 2 years. Then I went to law school, moved back here to go to law school. So that's 9 years of just grinding and like developing myself. And then all of a sudden, I became a lawyer. 5 years after that, helped open up a nightclub. And people are like, oh, was he like an overnight success? Because it kind of like came out of nowhere. Like you said, I started doing these networking events. By the time I'm meeting 400 or 500 people a week, they're like, oh, like he's obviously doing well for himself.
Right.
But
how the fuck did he do it?
People are not, thinking about like, oh, like, where were y'all when I was like, staying up all hours of the night, trying to, prepare for an exam in law school. Like, there's a lot that goes through that.
Yep.
And so I appreciate the hustle. I appreciate the grind, but even once I became a lawyer, it was, there's a lot that goes into that. I made partner at my firm, I think about 5 years ago or so now. And that, is like the proverbial glass ceiling, right? Like, when I made partner, there were probably like 130, 40 lawyers in the litigation group that were partners. I was the only one who was not white. One out of literally over 100, right? And so now there's 4 of us who are diverse partners in the litigation group, and the firm is growing, and I'm super proud of the firm in the ways that we are, improving diversity, equity, and inclusion, and doing all those things. We're the biggest firm in the Twin Cities now. We have over 400 lawyers, which we eclipsed just this past September.
Congrats.
But like having the support, was important, because like I wouldn't be where I am if I had to do it alone. And that's why it's important. I believe in reaching back while I climb. Because like I didn't get here by myself. I had mentors and sponsors and people who took me under their wing. Right. And I want to do the same thing. Yep.
Yep. So let's flip it back. So when you told your family that you wanted to be an attorney and a lawyer, and you're going for this end of story, there's no changing your mind. What kind of vibe did you get from them?
Man, what's crazy is that me becoming a lawyer was by accident. Like I was not one of those individuals who was like, man, I knew since I was 7 years old that I was going to be a lawyer. Like that wasn't for me. Like growing up. So I grew up in, a single parent household, low income, on assistance on the north side. And, my mom was like, you're going to be a doctor one day. Yeah. Like that was ingrained in her brain. Like that's what you're going to do. Yeah. Right. And so I think that's a common, theme in Asian households. Like all the parents want their kids to become doctors. Okay. Right. And so she was like, you're going to become a doctor. And so when I started undergrad, I was a pre-med student. I was taking all the biologies, the chems, doing the related labs, hated it, but did decent enough. Right. I did okay. But by my sophomore year, I took a class, organic chemistry. It was an 8 a.m. class, in an auditorium, and I slept every day. And like after 2 weeks of that, I was like, why am I wasting my time? Like, I don't don't want to do this. I have no desire for it.
Yeah.
And so when I finally got the courage to tell my mom I was not going to become a doctor, right?
She had the spoon ready to hit
Listen, that took a lot of like bravery to finally approach her, like, Mom, I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm sorry. But her very first question was like, well, what are you going to do instead? I didn't expect that question. And so I was like, I think I'm going to be a lawyer. And she was like, oh, prestigious career. All right, maybe you should do that. All I was thinking is I'm going to get her off my back for the next 2.5 years until I graduate, from undergrad.
Right.
And so as I was getting ready to graduate from the U of M, of course, my mom comes back. It's like, have you applied for law school? Do you got to take some tests to get in? Like, what are you doing? Are you going to law school? And I was like, I don't know yet. And so to buy more time, I was like, I'm going to go to grad school. I'm going to move to California, pursue a master's degree in criminal justice, mainly just because I was interested in that area.
Yeah.
And then we'll see. And so while I was in California in my grad program, there was a lawyer in my cohort, and she was like, you know what? You need to just take the LSAT, apply to law school, and if you get in, you go. And if you don't, you can tell your mom you tried, right? And so I was like,
fair.
You know what? You're right. So while I'm wrapping up my master's thesis, I take the LSAT, I applied to a few law schools, and I, fortunately received a couple scholarships here in Minnesota. One was from Hamline University School of Law, and one was William Mitchell School of Law. They have since combined. Now it's Mitchell Hamline. But I ended up deciding to go to William Mitchell. And so I moved back here from California after finishing my master's degree program. And that was 2006. And as I mentioned, even when I got to law school, I didn't have a clue what I was going to do.
Right.
I was like, well, shit, I got in.
Yeah.
I told my mom I was going to do this. I'm going to do it. Right. But like.
So there's different categories when you go to school for an attorney. Mm-hmm. Is there different classes and shit you have to go to if you want to be in divorce or you want to be in adoption or all these other categories that there is? Does that mean you have to go down this road, down that road, or is it all the same road?
There's all right. So you have your core classes like your first year, and then you can take electives like a family law or, other classes that you might be interested in, like intellectual property or trust and estates.
Yeah.
Right. But the thing that's unique about the area of law, and that's why it's called the practice of law, is once you graduate law school and pass the bar, you can really work in whatever area you're interested in, right? So as I mentioned, I've been in 5 different practice groups.
Yep.
I've only had to take 1 bar.
Okay.
Right? And so, as long as there's something that you're interested in, you can explore that, right? Like, what do we know here in Minnesota? Cannabis. That's a new area the law just passed, so now there are people dabbling in that.
Yeah.
Data privacy, cybersecurity, that was all, brand new just 10, 15 years ago. Crypto. So like whatever areas are emerging in the market, if you're interested in it, you can go do it. And so for me, while I've always been interested in sports and entertainment, I didn't have the network that was necessary to help me do any business development activity in that space. And so I was just learning how to be a lawyer and developing a network and meeting a bunch of people. And so, it wasn't until, like I mentioned, 2018, I was at a legal conference. It was either New Orleans or Austin, Texas or somewhere. And I meet a guy from Ohio. And I'm like, so what do you do? And he's like, I'm a sports lawyer. And I was like, bro, that's like my dream job. Like, tell me a little bit about what that means.
Right.
And he was like, well, we both work at big firms, right? So let's just say your firm represents company A, a Fortune 500 company. That company comes to the firm for whatever legal issues it has, right? So company A is looking to acquire a parcel of land to build a new store. They're going to hire your real estate lawyers at your firm to help them navigate that. Oh, company A just fired their CEO. Now there's like a potential employment issue. You're going to handle the employment work, right? So he was like, my approach to working with professional athletes and entertainers is the same way. When I start working with them, I help them with anything in their, profession, career that intersects with the need for legal assistance, right? And so,
and that could vary,
and that's the thing. Like, and it does vary. And I can tell you, some of my professional athlete clients, the stuff that I've worked with them on, I don't do the work because I'm not that type of lawyer, right? So, like, I've done estate plans. I've drafted, when I say I mean my firm,
right.
Collectively. I've worked with attorneys who have had to write, prenup agreements, form nonprofit, entities, right, for their AAU programs or whatever. And so I'm not a trust and estates attorney. I'm not going to learn right now. So at my firm, I can just loop in the trust and estates lawyer. Say, right. Hey, I have a client. They want to do some estate planning. They want to, get a prenup together. Can you help? Can you help with that? Right. And so I'm kind of the relationship manager for my client. And then I loop in the right team of legal experts. Right. And so now with this client, I essentially become their outside general counsel. Right. So I'm the first call when they have a legal need, right? So as an example, business manager might hit me up and say, "Hey, we are presented with a PPM to do an investment in a company in Georgia. Can you take a look at this?" Yes, someone can take a look at this. Let me find the right, expert
Right.
for that at my firm. Or, we want to start this, this AAU program. Can you file this nonprofit? I got somebody at my firm who does that. And so I'm kind of like the quarterback of the situation, calling out the plays and getting the right personnel into the huddle.
Okay.
Right. So like we're doing this for this person, and what I learned is, oftentimes these clients, they have targets on their back.
Right.
Who doesn't want them to invest in a car wash, restaurant, club, like whatever it is? They have a lot of opportunities.
Right.
Then they're thinking about life after sports. Like, what am I do after that? Can you help me navigate that path? And so, I'm just one professional on a team of trusted advisors that supports that client.
Okay. So with that being said, so you when you started with Jones,
yep,
in 18, when was it to you where you were like, all right, I'm just now an investor in the club and I am diving deep into the sports world as an attorney, a law. When did that register to you, or did it not register to you that I need to keep these two separate? This is where we were going to draw the line. I'm starting to get business on this because I feel like as a guy from the outside, this is just my take here, but as an owner in a nightclub and then as an attorney, those two things could end up real bad. You know what I mean? And so at some point, I would assume you got to separate that because things could get entangled that you don't want to be entangled at all.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the common notion that most people think, but for me it was the opposite.
Okay.
I actually merged them together and like did that more and more because what happened was, I was able to develop what I refer to as the business case for why my involvement in that industry has led to the opportunities that I've had, right? And so even beyond sports and entertainment, here's another example. I threw a day party like several years ago, and we wanted to cater some food, and so we were able to hire somebody as a caterer. And at that time, the caterer had just started his own business as a caterer, but he was like a regional chef for, one of the popular, chains of restaurants here. And so at the end of that party, I mean, we had like, a few hundred people come out, all the food sold out. And this is the first time I met this caterer. I was like, yo, bro, like, obviously your food was smacking. Like,
yeah,
how was this? He's like, man, this is such a great opportunity. And, we were starting to chop it up. And he was like, I don't want to be a regional chef for this company forever. Like, I have ideas, I have concepts I want to explore. Like, I want to do my own thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, man, let's exchange information. Let's connect.
Networking, guys, that's what that's called.
Man, listen, right? Shortly after that, grabbed breakfast downtown. I was like, all right, well, tell me your ideas. And he was like, yeah, so I have this concept, and I was like, man, that sounds super dope, first of all. And it was like, I want to try this, right?
Yeah.
So like, I'm trying some of this food and it is amazing, right? And I was like, all right, so how can I support you do what you want to do?
Right.
Right. And so we're developing and, fast forward, Soul Bowl is a restaurant that's, at all the arenas pretty much in town. If you go to Target Center or Target Field, whatever, you'll see Soul Bowl. They're, in the North Loop, and now they're in the V3 Aquatic Center. And, that's my client now.
Yeah.
And that was literally because I threw an event, needed somebody to provide food. His food was great. And now, like we're working together. And now they have, another restaurant in the Mill City District downtown, obviously doing very well. And, I'm just grateful to have been, a part of that process. Like, what do you need? Like, you need to file some trademarks? Cool. Let me loop in our trademark attorney to help. You want to review this lease to make sure you're protecting your interests? Cool. Let me loop in the real estate guy that can help you look at that. Right. So once I've started to develop clients, whether in sports entertainment or hospitality or wherever they may be, I'm able to make the business case that I've met these folks through the nightlife in some capacity.
Yeah.
So there are people who are entrepreneurs and CEOs and all that want to go out and kick and have a good time.
Right. Yep.
And so, if they're going out and I'm involved in the nightlife, we can meet, we can connect. And if I'm getting clients that way, I don't know what firm is going to say, you need to separate these two.
Right. Yep.
Right. And so, I'm grateful that my firm particularly is very entrepreneurial. I'm not the only lawyer that does stuff outside of the practice of law.
So they understand.
They do.
They understand.
Our tagline is where law and business meet.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like we're entrepreneurial as a law firm where, I wanted to start the sports entertainment practice group at the firm. It was 2018. I was a senior associate. I wasn't even a partner at the firm. I put together a business plan after meeting the lawyer from Ohio, right?
Yeah.
So after I met him, I was like, that sounds like a practice I can develop. I went back to my hotel. First, I did market research. What firms in the Twin Cities have sports entertainment practice areas? There weren't any robust practice groups in that space. There are, attorneys who dabble in that, and I knew some of them. And I was like, all right, so I think the market is right, right for this opportunity. So then I was like, all right, well, who are the contacts I've developed from 2015 to 2018? Who have I met? Listed out all of my potential clients, potential referral sources, who are people who work in that industry. They might not be my client, but they know somebody who, they could introduce that might be a potential client, right? And I essentially put together a business plan. I was like, cool, go knock on the door. President of the firm at the time, hey, John, do you have a couple minutes to chat? Yep. Sit down. I was like, I got an idea. I want to launch a sports entertainment practice group. Here, is my plan, my vision for doing this. And after 20, 30-minute conversation, he was like, it's well thought out. Go for it.